Okay, as you can see, the Masternode is now set up. The server is now set up and running. You'll notice if you go to the servers menu area under instances, you can see that to the right of your server, these three dots allow you to do things like view the console, stop and restart your server, reinstall it, and even destroy it. So you can, for example, view the console, and here you can see you can actually log into your server directly. As well as that, by clicking on the instance here, you can find out more information about your server, including useful things like IP address, which you're going to need for later, so it's definitely a good idea to make a note of that, and also the root password. That's obviously something you want to keep secure and protected, but you can not only choose to show the password, but you can choose to copy it. So it's a good idea at this point to make a copy of that password and maybe change it later once you've logged into your server. So in order to configure our server, we're going to need to be able to connect to it from the desktop ideally. If you're using Mac or Linux or Unix, you can connect from the terminal using SSH, but if you're on Windows, you're going to need another piece of software to do that. So what most people use is a program called PuTTY. The link to PuTTY is in the documentation that comes with this video. But basically what you want to do is find the Windows installer for PuTTY for your particular computer. So in this case, I'm choosing the 64-bit installer for my copy of Windows 10 and download and install this application. Once you've downloaded and installed it, which mine is already installed, so I'll just choose the repair option. You'll find that in the PuTTY folder, which lives in the program files directory, you'll find a whole lot of tools, including PuTTY and PuTTYgen. They are the two tools we're going to need as we proceed. Here we are in the PuTTY folder. It usually lives in C program files PuTTY, and you can see the PuTTY application and PuTTYgen. So it's usually a good idea to make a shortcut to this app on your desktop or in your quick launch bar, because it tends to close itself once you disconnect from a server, which is pretty annoying. So in order to connect to our new server, we need to run PuTTY. Here's the interface. So basically what we need to tell PuTTY is the IP address of our server that we want to connect to. I've just made a note of it here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. Port 22, which is the default, SSH, which is our protocol for connecting, and I'm just going to save the name of this server for later. So let's just call it my CHC Masternode and save it. And one thing we can do is down under the connection data option on the left is automatically put in our username. So for now we're going to use root, but we want to change that later on. We don't want to be connecting to our server as root all of the time. Okay, so I can go back to my session and save it. Okay, so now I'm ready to connect to my server. I just need to know the IP address, which I have, and the password, the root password, which I'm just going to copy here from the server information on the Vultr site. So let's click open. Okay, this will happen the first time, an authentication check. You can usually just click yes on that. Username root, wanting the password, which you can paste in, and then I'm connected. On Windows, you can just right click your mouse to paste. Okay, so we're now connected to our server and we're now the root user. Okay, now we're connected to our server. The first thing we want to do is to change our root password, and you can just do that by typing password with no OR, so pass WD, and pressing enter, and it's going to ask us for a new password. Okay, which you enter twice, and your password's now updated successfully. We don't want to be using the root account to access the server because it has complete control over the server, and it's quite easy to make a mistake or do something that renders your server useless and you have to start all over again. So it's a lot safer to create a new user account and just give that account super user privileges as needed. So what I'm going to do is create a new user now and then give it some additional permissions. So you do that with the add user command, and I'm going to call myself CHC user for now. Okay, it's going to want a password, so give it a password like that. You can additionally add this other information such as full name, room number, work phone, that sort of stuff, but this is not necessary in this case. And we have a user. Now we want to add this user to a group, and that group gives it permissions to use a command called sudo, S-U-D-O, which allows it to use commands that a root user can use, so do things that are at a super user level. So in order to do that, we just simply type usermod space -a capital G space sudo space and our new username, chc user, and that has added that user to the group, allowing it to do the sorts of things we need to do to install our Masternode. So let's check that's working. Let's log out. Okay, let's go back to PuTTY. Go back to my session. Let me load my session first. Sorry, so I'm loading up the details of this connection. I'm going to change the auto login username to my new user. Go back. I'm going to save it again. Now I'm going to connect, and this time I'm going to use the password for my new user, and I'm in. So connecting to a server using a username and password is not necessarily the most secure way to do it. What we want to do now is set up a secure key, a file of which one is kept on your machine and one is kept on the server, and you can only log into the server if you have the file. And that's what we're using PuTTYgen for. You'll remember I mentioned PuTTYgen earlier as one of the tools. So this is PuTTYgen. What it does is it generates a public and private key pair for you, and it's quite easy to use. So what we need to do when we run this is just check that the type of key we are generating is RSA by default, which is great, and we click generate. Now, in order to make the key more random, it's asking us to move our mouse randomly around in this area, and this helps it generate a random and more sort of unpredictable key. And here is our key, okay? A very exciting looking file. What we want to do now is add a comment to that key, and that's usually your email address. That way you can sort of keep track of the key if you have more than one of them. You can also at this point add a passphrase. Now if you use this key without a passphrase, that's fine. It means you can connect and you don't really have to type anything, but if you add a passphrase here, whenever you use these keys to connect to the server, you will still have to add type the phrase when you're logging in. So again, I mean, for me it's always a good idea to be a bit more secure. So now we've got all of this information. Let's save both the public key and the private key. Okay, so saving the public key, I'll just call it Public Key for originality. And I'm going to save the private key, and again you can save this in the same location if you want. But bear in mind this private key is crucial to your connection to the server, so don't lose it and don't leave it where other people can access it. Okay, and the last thing we need to do is copy this public key information, and we're going to paste it onto our server so that we can create the public key file on the server, and that will match with the private key file on our computer and allow us to connect. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, first of all, we right click in this box and we choose select all, which has already happened, and we click copy. Just to note that the first part of this key has to be SSH-RSA. If it isn't, the key isn't going to work. And if you have that problem, pop onto the Chaincoin website, chat with our guys, and we'll tell you how to fix it. Okay, so we've copied our key. Now let's connect to our server. So again, just firing up PuTTY. Now what we want to do here is, rather than connect in as our user that we created earlier, we actually want to connect in as root. This part we want to do is root. So just change the auto login username to root, come back to here and open the connection using username root, put in the root password, okay, and now we're connected. Now what we want to do is create this key file in the user's account. Okay, so we need to impersonate the user essentially. So we do that by typing su space dash and our username, chc user in this case, and that essentially logs us in as that user, but we have superpowers, which is what we need here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to make a folder in the user's directory using the mkdir command, and we need to make this folder and call it .ssh like that. Okay, ~.ssh. Okay, that makes that folder in the user's directory, and if I switch to that user's directory and I list everything in it, you will see the .ssh folder. We need to change the permissions on that folder, so chmod 700 .ssh. Okay, just makes it slightly more secure. Now we need to make a file inside that folder called authorized keys, and I'm just going to use the nano tool which comes built into Ubuntu. It's a text editor, so I'm just going to say nano .ssh / authorized keys, like that, with the American spelling. Authorized keys, yes, that's correct, and hit enter. So here we are in our text editor, and you can just use the right mouse button on the mouse to paste that in, and you'll see if I scroll across to the left there, that whole key has been pasted in. So let's exit with Control X. Let's choose yes to save the modified buffer by pressing Y and pressing enter, and it's written that file. So let's just change into that folder and list everything that's in it. There's our authorized keys file, and if I use the cat command, you'll see there it is, it's got the key in it, which is great. Now we need to restrict the permissions of this file, again for security, so I'm just going to go chmod 600 authorized keys. Now I'm going to return back to being the root user again. So I'm back at the root user, and then I'm going to log out. Okay, and I'm going to close the PuTTY key generator here. Okay, so now we've set the key up on our server, let's change PuTTY so that when we log in, we no longer use a username and password, but we use the keys that we've set up. So let's load this little profile that we've created. Let's go to data, it's CHC user, that's fine. But this time, instead of prompting us for a password, we're going to tell it in the SSH section that we have a private key file already. So under connection, SSH auth, we're going to browse, and we're going to choose our private key. And now if I go back up to the session, I'll just save it again. And now when I click open, you'll notice that it's logging me in as CHC user. It's authenticating with the keys, so that's working, and it's asking for the passphrase, which is just that little additional level of security that I'm paranoid about. So there we go, great. Cool, so now we can log into our server in a much more secure way than we were before. Now that we know we can log in using SSH keys and not have to worry about the whole username password thing, let's turn that feature off. And by turning off password authentication on our server, it's going to make it more secure. So assuming that you're logged into the server using your keys, using the SSH keys like we did before, we issue this command, sudo nano, which is going to open a file for us, and the file is etc/ssh/sshd_config, a configuration file for our SSH connection. Now it's the first time that we've tried to run a super user command as this user, so it's just going to get us to confirm our password first. What we want to do here is look for a line in this config file called password authentication as one word. A quick way to do that is just press Ctrl W and just look for it this way, password authentication, like that, and search. And here it is. Now you'll notice there's a hash to the left of the P. That means that that line is commented out. So let's just backspace. We want to uncomment that particular parameter, and we want to say password authentication no. Okay, we don't want people to be able to log into our server using passwords. Another couple of things we need to check is, do we have public key authentication turned on? Okay, so let's just search for Pubkey. Pubkey authentication, yes, so that's good, that's what we wanted. And the other thing we want to check for is challenge response authentication. That's another way of logging in. We want to turn that off. So challenge response authentication, no, perfect, that's what we want. So this config file is all good. So we can hit Control X to quit. We're going to press Y to say yes, we want to save it, and press enter. So now we just need to restart the SSH daemon, and it'll reread that configuration file and take our instructions into account. So sudo etc init.d ssh restart. Okay, so this basically, as the administrator user, calls this SSH tool. It tells it to restart, and it's restarted. So now we want to test it again, so let's log out, and we're out. Let's jump into PuTTY, load our configuration file, hit open, put in our password, and we're in. So everything is still working, which is great. The final step in securing our server before we get round to installing the Chaincoin Masternode is to turn on the firewall, and that will help protect the server against attempts to connect to it and exploit vulnerabilities and all of that sort of thing. So Ubuntu comes with a firewall called UFW, which stands for Uncomplicated Firewall, which is great. I like uncomplicated. So there are a number of ports and things we want to set. So I've popped those into a text file here, as you can see, and they're also documented on the website. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to set up the rules for UFW, and then we're going to enable it. So you can see here we're going to allow OpenSSH, which is going to allow us to continue to connect. We're going to allow ports 8333, which is a default Bitcoin port, and to be honest, I'm not sure that we need to leave that one open, but I'm going to anyway. We're going to allow 11994, which is the port for Chaincoin, and then we're going to set some defaults for what can happen. We can allow outgoing connections by default, but we can deny any other incoming connections by default, and then we will enable it. So it's just a matter of copying and pasting each line into the server, and if you're on Windows, you can just right-click the mouse to do that. So you can see each time I do it that the rules are being updated. I'm just going to make that smaller and put that over here just to make it a little bit easier. Here's our 1194. Okay, and this one. And then we're going to enable it. Okay, it's warning us about this. There we go, firewall is active and enabled on system startup. So let's just test that's working. I'm going to log out. I'm going to log back in with PuTTY and just make sure that I can still connect. And yes, we're back in, which is great.